Hey, this is Scott Grant, and you're listening to The Scott Grant Show on 103.9 FM WSOS, and we're broadcasting today from beautiful downtown Ponte Vedra Beach. And my guest today is Rick Doeschler, and Rick was involved in some of the most exciting moments in Jacksonville musical history, so we're really thrilled to have you here. Welcome, Rick.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here. Pleasure. Looking forward to it.
And it's great to have you. And first off, you were friends with Ronnie Vanzant. And for people in the audience that don't know, Ronnie Vanzant's, hard to imagine anybody doesn't know this, but Ronnie Vanzant is the founder and the frontman for the Southern rock band Lynyrd Skynyrd. And you knew Ronnie when you were a kid.
Actually, yes. I was introduced to him by his girlfriend at the time in junior high school. And we had a little band that we called the Squires. And we played around, and she wanted to know if she could introduce her boyfriend to me because he wanted to be the singer of our band. And I said, sure, because we didn't like to sing. And we met at Carter's Pharmacy over in Ortega, and he sang a couple of songs. We said, sure, you can be the singer. And we did that for about a year. And then when high school came up, we broke up, and he got together with Alan Collins and Gary Rosington and Bob Burns. And it went from there. And
they founded a band called My Backyard.
I think that's correct. That was pre-Lynyrd Skynyrd.
And what was the name of the group you had prior to that with Ronnie?
Well, we started out before Ronnie. It was called the Squires, and then when Ronnie joined, we changed the name to Us.
Oh, I like Us better. Yeah. I think Us is a better name.
Sort of like the Who.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking too. Immediately, like the Who. So, and I've heard stories before. You talked about practicing in your garage, is that right?
Yes, practice in my garage and the drummer's garage, and we had neighbors turn their hose on us because we were too loud, obnoxious. So
that's interesting. Well, and your parents must have loved it, right?
They didn't like it. Dad was not excited about it. He was a banker and didn't care for it. So.
Oh, that's funny. Now, you told me a story once, and I love this story. You told me a story once about your dad. I guess Ronnie Vanzant had been over to the house and had for practice and had left. And what did your dad say to your mom? How did that go? Tell me this whole story.
Yeah, that was actually when I was in high school, and we had disbanded our band, and Ronnie was with Alan Collins and Gary Rosington, and Ronnie asked if they could come over and have me teach them a couple of songs that they didn't know how to play, that we used to play in our band. And everybody knew everybody, so it wasn't a big deal. And I started to show them some of the songs and how we did it. And my dad was coming home into the door, and he acknowledged them. And their hair was getting a little longer by this time. And he went into the kitchen and said to Mom, "Who are those guys?" And Mom said, you remember Ronnie? He was in Rick's band. And he goes, "Oh, okay. Well, you better keep your eyes on the silver." He was not real sure about them, so
that's great. I love that. So your dad was they looked a little scruffy, let's say scruffy. I can see that. Okay, want to remind everybody out there that next weekend the Wounded Warriors Project is having their Carry Forward event. It's a 5K, and you can either walk or run it on your own, or you can carry someone. Which sounds pretty exciting. We're going to go and we're going to listen to some music, and we'll be right back with Rick to talk some more about the Lynyrd Skynyrd. Hi, this is Scott Grant. You're listening to The Scott Grant Show on 103.9 FM WSOS. And I'm here today, and we've been talking to Rick Doeschler about his experiences with Ronnie Vanzant of Lynyrd Skynyrd fame. And would you say that Lynyrd Skynyrd is the most famous group or individual to come out of Jacksonville?
Probably so. I would say musically, they certainly were worldwide, and pretty much everybody knows them, and their legacies still last.
I know that when they poll people in the area and they say, what's the most famous thing about your city, that Lynyrd Skynyrd comes back hugely in the lead. It's not even close, and most of the rest are sort of scattered around. Zora Neale Hurston usually gets a couple votes, but Lynyrd Skynyrd, and so Lynyrd Skynyrd and Jacksonville are somewhat synonymous. And you grew up with these guys, and the story is that they took the name from the band from a gym teacher or coach at one of the high schools. Do you know anything about that?
Well, that was Coach Lynyrd Skynyrd was one of the coaches at Lee High School, Robert E. Lee High School. And this was about the time when they were in Lee in high school. And I'd heard a different story, hearsay, about the change of the name, but I kind of think they took it from Coach Skinner's name.
And was Coach Skinner, what kind of guy? Did you have him in school, or was he one of your gym teachers?
Well, they kind of all handled all of the kids during, I'll call it gym class, but if you were an athlete, then you kind of got assigned. Like I think he was the basketball coach, and I was on the tennis team, so we had Coach Vinyl.
Oh, interesting. And what was Leonard like?
Well, all of the coaches were pretty much the same. They were kind of militaristic, if you want to say, from what we were used to. They didn't allow long hair. They used the 2 finger above the eyebrow rule, and if you had hair that went below the 2 fingers, you were sent home and were not allowed to come back unless you got a haircut. And you had to report to show them that you got a haircut.
Oh, you had to report to actually show them that
Yes.
you had a haircut.
Yeah.
And that's what happens to Rosington, right? Is that the story that Gary Rosington, one of the members of Leonard Skinner, gets sent home from school and sort of bore a grudge?
That's basically right. Ronnie, Gary was in my class. Alan was a year younger, I believe, and Ronnie was 2 years older. But Gary went through the routine that we all did and had to be sent home, and he didn't like it, and kind of went on from there with that.
So tell me, were you ever sent home for a haircut?
I was.
Oh, wow. What'd your parents say?
Oh, they didn't like the long hair at all anyway, so they were in favor of that. So it fit good with them.
That's great. That's a great story. How many people out there would trade their lives to have been sent home from school by Leonard Skinner to get a haircut? I mean, that's a badge of honor if there ever was one.
Well, back then, it was it's a flip flop. That was you had to go through the motions and everything. But we laugh about it now. So
that's great. Now, Leonard Skinner himself went on and achieved some amount of fame as being the guy behind the name. They actually put one of his real estate signs, and I think he operates bars as well, but he had a real estate business, and they put one of his real estate businesses on the jacket of one of their albums. Is that right?
I believe that's correct. Yeah.
And it included the phone number.
Yeah, that's right.
And one of the stories that people, or the Skinners tell us, that people would call up sometimes in the middle of the night. And there would be this pregnant silence on the other end. They'd be, who is this? Who is this? And finally the person would say, I just wanted to see if you were real.
Yeah, I think that's a true story. Oh. Yeah, he would get calls.
And you have come here today and have sort of also told us that Leonard Skinner is a real person, the namesake of the band. Today on the show, we're urging people to reach out to Wounded Warriors Project and their Carry Forward 5K. General Mike Linnington is the CEO of Wounded Warriors and a personal friend of mine and a real stand-up guy. We're going to play some songs. What's your favorite Leonard Skinner song?
I would probably have to say "Simple Man" because it's fun to play as a musician, as a guitarist with the second guitarist, because you get to play the harmony guitar parts, and I've always enjoyed that. All
right, we will try and get "Simple Man" in during this break. Hi, this is Scott Grant. You're listening to The Scott Grant Show on WSOS 103.9 FM out of St. Augustine. And I'm here today with Rick Doeschler. And Rick's been telling us some really interesting stories about his experiences with Ronnie Vanzant of Leonard Skinner fame. And you have one story, and this is a story we really brought you in here for. But you saw the Rolling Stones in 1965, and not a lot of people realize this. But the Rolling Stones came here to Jacksonville in 1965, May 8th, 1965, really early in their careers, and performed a concert. And you were there. Is that correct?
Correct, absolutely.
And where did the show take place?
It was at the Coliseum, the old Coliseum downtown.
A lot of bands came there. That was a popular venue.
Very much so.
The Beatles had come 8 or 9 months earlier and had played the Gator Bowl, but the Rolling Stones played the Coliseum.
Correct.
And now the part of the story that fascinates me is how you got there. Like, who did you go with now again to that show?
Well, I didn't have my driver's license at that point, and Ronnie was kind enough to say, well, why don't you go with me? So we went in his red Mustang, and we got tickets and went to the show, and were blown away by the Rolling Stones. It was a pretty big crowd, if I remember right, and they did all their hits at that time. and you want me to tell the beyond that, or
that's all right. Let's stop there for a second. Let me ask you a couple questions. So what you're saying is when you say Ronnie, you mean Ronnie Vanzant?
Correct.
So you went to a Rolling Stones concert in 1965 with Ronnie Vanzant in a red Mustang?
That's correct.
Okay, that's got to be the coolest thing I've ever heard.
Well, he wasn't a celebrity at that point. But.
No, neither was Mick Jagger, for that matter. I mean, certainly not the celebrity he would become. That's absolutely amazing. So what's the rest of the story? You said that you intimated there was more. I'm not sure what could be even top that, if it's possible.
I think Ronnie was impressed by the Rolling Stones, as all of us were, and Ronnie's continued musical interest. As they formed Lynyrd Skynyrd and played and toured around the world, they had the opportunity to play at a British outdoor huge thing called Nebworth. I'm not sure exactly too much about it, but it's like a Woodstock thing. And they went on right before the Rolling Stones. And I understand from friends that were there that they actually performed much, much better, and the crowd was really into Lynyrd Skynyrd.
Let me ask you this. Ronnie Vanzant, who did he think was better, him or Mick Jagger?
Oh, I'm sure Ronnie thought he was much better.
That's great. You know, that show is really, really early, and one of the things that fascinates me about that show at the Florida Coliseum is that it takes place May 8th, and the Stones legend says that on May 6th, 2 days earlier, Mick Jagger penned the words to Satisfaction, and that they were first recorded on the 10th, 2 days after our concert. The Clearwater concert that day was cut short by a riot. There were only 4 songs. On the next night, they play at a fraternity house, believe it or not, in Georgia. And then they come here to Jacksonville. And it's possible that Satisfaction was performed for the very first time that night while you and Ronnie Vanzant watched.
It's very possible. I honestly don't remember the song list, and I don't know whether that's published. Sometimes you can see what bands actually performed during those early days, but I'm not sure about that. It's possible.
It's hard to get information on that concert. As it turns out, none of the newspapers even covered it. There's not a lot. It's mostly oral history. Some suggestion that the Beach Boys were there as well, but I know that you've said that you're not sure if that's true.
I believe that's correct.
Okay, so the Beach Boys were there, and it was billed as sort of a battle of Britain versus the United States?
That would probably be right. Yeah.
But you went to see the British guys.
Oh, absolutely. I was and still am big British invasion band.
And Ronnie was the same way. He wanted to see the Stones. That's what he was going for.
I think so. Yeah, they liked all of the American music too, the music of the time. But that was the thing back then. It was the British invasion bands that had all the guitars and the amps, and they looked cool. And that was what's on the radio. They had the hits.
Okay. Well, we're going to go listen to, I think, a couple of Rolling Stones songs. But I do want to sort of remind everybody the one story. They say that this was the moment, and you were there, that Ronnie Vanzant decided he was going to be a rock star. Hi, this is Scott Grant. You're listening to The Scott Grant Show. We're on 103.9 FM WSOS, and we are broadcasting from beautiful downtown Ponte Vedra Beach. My guest today is Rick Doeschler, and we've been talking, well, first about Lynyrd Skynyrd and Ronnie Vanzant, and then more recently about the Rolling Stones. And you seem to me like you were involved in every major rock and roll event of the early 60s here in Jacksonville. Is that true?
No, hardly. At that time, I was a kid, real young, but I sure loved music and was trying to be involved in everything I could.
Right before the break, we were talking about Ronnie Vanzant, the moment he decided he was going to be a rock star. And the legend says it's here in Jacksonville at that Rolling Stones concert. Did he ever say anything like that to you that day?
I know he was really excited about the show after the show when we went home, and there was a lot of songs that he really enjoyed. And Ronnie watched and observed how bands would do things, and he would implement those things into his genre on stage. So he was always learning and watching and listening.
So he was very imitative.
Very much so.
And later on in life, is there any indication he's looks like Jagger at any point? Does he move like Jagger?
No. Jagger initially was not animated, but when the story was when he saw James Brown dance all over the stage, that's when he started doing it. But Ronnie was not like that.
Oh, that's interesting. I've been watching a lot of clips of the Beatles recently, and in the early days, the moves are not that great. I mean, right. John Lennon looks particularly stiff, and we all think of John Lennon as this, he is this iconic figure. So the other event that you were at was before this Rolling Stone show, and that was back in September of 1964, and I think everybody knows I love this event. The Beatles come to the Gator Bowl, and they play in the aftermath of a hurricane. Hurricane Dora hits on September the 10th, and the very next day the Beatles are on stage at the Gator Bowl, and you were there.
I was there. Talked my parents into going.
And you talked your parents into taking you, huh?
Yes.
So all three of you?
With my little brother Randy, yes.
Oh, wow. So four of you.
Four of us, yeah.
And did you have the $5 seats or the $4 seats?
It was the $4. We were up, $4 seats, I'm sure. We were up in the higher section, not on the ground.
Now, if you were in the grandstand, yeah, those were the $4. Those were the cheap seats.
Cheap seats.
Though $5 sounds like a pretty reasonable price to see the Beatles to me, even back in 1964. They were paid $50,000 to be here, and I think they sold about 35,000 tickets. You can do the math. They made some money, whoever promoted, and it was WAPE and Brennan's radio station. So, what'd your parents think of the Beatles?
They didn't care for them at all. I remember Dad saying, I think when we saw them on TV on the Sullivan Show, he said, "I'll give them 6 months, and you'll never hear from them again."
That's funny. You know, a lot of people say that story gets repeated, and it gets repeated particularly regarding that Jacksonville show. We talked to a woman the other night, and she recalled that her mother had given her a choice. She had $5, and she could go to see the Beatles, or she could have a new skirt. And she said to her, "Just remember, the Beatles are here today, and they'll be gone tomorrow. But that skirt's going to last you a long time." I think in the end, the Beatles had the longer lasting run. So your parents didn't think much of it, but they suffered through it. Did they look happy at all at any point during the show?
The audience, the crowd was extremely loud, and back then the amplification was terrible. They didn't have the big speakers and monitors and things, and the Beatles played without any monitors. They couldn't even hear what they were playing.
Oh, that's interesting. I don't think I knew that. I knew that Ringo Starr had to nail his drum kit, or somebody did it for him, I'm sure, to the stage to keep it from blowing away. And I also knew that they used the public address, which would have been the same public address that they used when Florida played Georgia.
Yes, probably, yeah.
So it was not designed for music. It was designed more for first down, Florida.
Correct.
And now you told me one other story. When your dad was leaving, he ran into some friends who I guess had also been talked into taking their kids to the show, right?
Yes.
And what'd your dad say?
The other gentleman asked Dad what he thought, and my dad said, "I'm going to go home and take some aspirin. This was pretty bad."
Oh, wow, that's funny. Go home and take some aspirin. Well, that was the reaction of the older people. We're going to go. We're going to play a couple Beatles tunes and then come back and talk some more with Rick Doeschler. Hi, this is Scott Grant, and you're listening to The Scott Grant Show on WSOS-FM 103.9 FM, broadcasting from beautiful downtown Ponte Vedra Beach. And I'm here with Rick Doeschler. And before the break, we were talking about that Beatles show, and you went to the Beatles show. Now, and this is in September 11th, 1964.
Correct.
And when I've talked to people who were at that show, one of the things that they've often repeated is that between the howling of the winds from the hurricane and the screaming of the girls, that they could barely hear anything. What's your perception on that?
That's true. It was difficult to hear them, and I don't, to this day, I don't understand how in the world they were able to hear themselves play. It was so loud, and again, they didn't have the monitors that they have now, where you can hear the music back to you. But they were right on the money. They just knew their material so well.
Well, they were playing a lot at that point. I mean, they were on a tour that was, I think, 26 shows in 33 days, and we're more than halfway through. I don't know how much more than halfway through. Do you remember any of the songs that they played?
I think they did Twist and Shout, and I Want to Hold Your Hand, and Long Tall Sally. I think Roll Over Beethoven, I think George did that one, I believe.
There's some evidence to suggest that they began with Roll Over Beethoven.
Could have been, yeah.
which was not their normal opening number. It's been suggested that perhaps that we were sort of rubbing a little bit the segregation question, which had come up before the concert. Right. But we don't know for sure. But Roll Over Beethoven, I think, was the opening number. So, and George would have opened.
That was George. Yeah, absolutely.
Which is, again, unusual.
Yep. When you think Paul and John were kind of the lead guys, and yet George was the initial singer.
Yes, at that show he was. Roll Over Beethoven. So, do you recall anything else about that show? How'd the crowd react?
Well, they were kind of what you saw on TV. They were running around screaming, and the police were trying to control the girls and guys. You would see some of the girls being carried off. They apparently fainted.
Oh, wow. They fainted. I guess that makes sense. I mean, I know girls went wild more than and young men too. But I know that and then that was the perception.
Right.
And if you read the Times Union articles from that period, they often talk about the girls. The girls going crazy, young girls, and the Beatles are a fad. Right. Because the only people that like them are young girls. Right. In fact, the line that they use in the movie and sometimes in the documentaries that says the Beatles are just a passing fad comes from the Times Union. It's always, I always chuckle because I know it's locally sourced. The Beatles are a fad. So what else? Anything else come to mind?
Well, I've had younger friends ask me that obviously we're not in the Beatle era, what it was like to go to the Beatles show. And I said, you can't really explain it. It was just kind of like a phenomenon. And if I had to say what it compared to, it would be almost being like a UFO landing in the White House lawn. There was nothing you can compare to. It was just a beyond belief phenomenon.
Well, they only come to Florida twice, and this is their only real show in Florida. And as you had pointed out to me in the break, they only tour from 64 to 66 in the U.S., so it's not a lot of opportunities.
We were very, very lucky to have seen them.
But like a UFO, in your mind, it's like a UFO.
There's nothing like it.
So if we walk out of here today and a UFO's landed, you're going to tell me that was, the second most exciting thing of your lifetime?
That would be the second thing, most exciting thing for me. So.
Behind the Beatles. And this, by the way, I want to remind the audience, this, by the way, is from a man who went to see the Rolling Stones with Ronnie Vanzant of Leonard Skinner in a 63 red Mustang, which has got to be still the coolest thing I've heard, certainly today and probably in a long while. We're going to go to a break. We're going to play some more music. Remind everybody to reach out to the Wounded Warriors Project. Next weekend they have their Carry Forward 5K, and that's going to be an exciting time. Hi, this is Scott Grant, and you're listening to The Scott Grant Show on WSOS 103.9 FM. And I'm here with Rick Doeschler, who is friends with Ronnie Vanzant of Leonard Skinner. We just passed an anniversary, and I don't think it was a particularly significant one, but it was the anniversary of his death, I think a week and a half ago. He died in the airplane crash. Is that right? Did we just have an anniversary?
I think there was something, and they also did have a big monument thing up there where the plane crash occurred.
Oh, wow, they put a monument there, too.
I think I saw something about that.
I know that they put a monument in front of his house where he grew up here in Jacksonville.
My understanding, correct.
A historical marker. So there's now one on the site of his death.
If it's not exactly on the site, it's near the site.
Well, a lot of people were shocked when it happened, and I think a lot of people are still grieving his passing. Are you one?
Yeah, it was just a horrible. I remember the day. It was just a horrible thing that we just couldn't believe it.
How did you hear about it?
A friend of mine called and said, "You won't believe this, but the plane carrying Leonard Skinner crashed, and some of them died." And I said, "Yeah, sure." I didn't believe it, So apparently it was true.
No, I remember being shocked as well. I think I was in high school, and I think when they died in '77, I think. And it was an awful event. So, did you go on to have a musical career after high school?
Well, total amateur. I played in a couple of bands around town. I was kidding earlier that my music is my golf game. I enjoy playing guitar and interacting with other musicians, but there's so many good players around town, and I'm not really one of them. But it's fun to continue to play, and I'm not in a band at the moment, but it's a lot of fun.
Oh, that's interesting. So what did you end up doing with your life and your career?
Well, after graduating from the University of Florida, I followed in my dad's footsteps, and he was a banker, and so I took the banking career route and did that basically my entire working career.
Oh, wow. How'd you like it?
They were initially it was good when they were the local banks, and then when the bigger banks came in, that made it more difficult. I didn't enjoy that era of it.
Okay. And do you still play music? I know that you played for a while with a friend of mine, John Miller. Is that right?
Yes. John's a great guy. We started we called it then when we started the Bay Street Blues Club, and John is the surviving member and has kept it up, and I think that's great. I'm glad he did it.
So okay, that sounds great. We're gonna go off and play some music. Is there a song you particularly like to hear?
How about "Come On" by the Rolling Stones?
Okay, we can do that. And before we go, I want to remind everybody that General Mike Linnington, who's the CEO of Wounded Warrior Project, lives right here in our area in St. Johns County, and they have a big event next weekend, November the 9th. It's called the Carry Forward 5K, and you have an option to do that 5K carrying somebody. I'm not sure who you're going to carry, but carrying somebody. And that sounds like a lot of fun.